Pontiac Video Network presents.
What's up? I'm AJ, and welcome back to Decklid Garage. In this video, we're going to be removing the engine, and from this video, we're going to be making a series of short how-to videos relating to the project. We're also going to be bagging and tagging the hardware. But before we start, I'd like to tell you what this is.
The trivia question from last video was a relatively easy one, but for many Fiero owners, it's either a source of frustration or a gentle reminder to put your seatbelt on. That's right, this is the door chime unit. It's located under the passenger side dash, in the passenger's footwell. It dings when you leave the door open, it dings when your emergency brake is on, and it dings when you have the key in the ignition and the car hasn't been started. Congratulations to Joshua, who is the first person to correctly identify this part. We also have to give an honorable mention to Turbo Slug, because he also identified it by the name given to it in the Fiero lore, the blue dinghy thingy. Thank you everyone for playing.
The first thing we're going to be doing is removing the deck lid, which has broken hinges that we will be fixing in a separate video, because it'll be easier to access the engine. I've assembled a series of tools here, including a T40 Torx bit, a 13mm socket, a 1/2-inch socket, and a screwdriver you don't really care about.
While taking off the deck lid would normally not be needed when removing the intake manifold, my ultimate goal in this project series is to pull the engine anyway, so it only makes sense for me to remove the deck lid since I will also need to rebuild the hinges at some point anyway. I start by placing something soft to absorb any potential impact between the deck lid and glass. I'm using a large folded tarp that I purchased from Harbor Freight. Normally, you would remove the 4 bolts holding the deck lid on, while leaving the hinge under tension, but because the straps are broken, I thought it best to relieve stress on the springs first. I used a small screwdriver which I placed between the spring bar and the deck lid frame. I used this as a leverage to take the pressure off the spring. There isn't much tension at this point, but I do it anyway just to reduce the possibility of the spring popping. I take the T40 Torx socket bit and unscrew the spring bar. I remove the screw, verify the spring is detached, and repeat the whole process on the other side. With both springs disconnected, I then remove the top hinge bolts that attach the deck lid to the bracket. I use a 1/2-inch socket to remove these bolts. We start with the driver's side, and then move on to the passenger side upper bolt. The deck lid is still well supported by the lower bolts and the bracket itself, so be sure to remove the lower bolts last. Next, we disconnect and remove the power trunk release harness if equipped, and then the radio interference harness that attaches to the metal plate on the underside of the deck lid. Remember, you will always want to start with the top bolts first as the angle prevents the deck lid from swinging back. If you remove the lower bolts first, the deck lid can potentially pivot from the top bolts on the bracket, allowing the engine bump to hit the back window. We now remove the lower bolts, starting with whichever side is most convenient to you. Once that side is removed, you can allow the trunk lid to carefully rest on the bracket, and then move to the other side. At this point, you'll want a second person to help you hold the trunk lid as you remove the last bolt. With both the bolts removed, I've enlisted the help of my dad to carefully lift the deck lid off the brackets and to move it off to the side where it's out of the way. Before doing anything else on the car, we'll remove the battery. But first, let's get rid of the milk jug rain shield. Goodbye, milk jug! We'll start by unscrewing the positive side first, then the negative terminal. Normally, the battery is held in place with a large rubber block and a 13mm bolt, but this is completely rusted and missing, so you can easily just pull the battery out. With most of the tension off of the springs and the lower bolts removed from the frame, the hinges can be carefully removed from the car. We'll repair these later. We'll also remove the spring bars. This can be done by pulling forward on the square loop at the bottom, and then carefully knocking out the large pin. Don't forget to catch it when it falls out.
I do not know where that went. Look, it's detaching.
We can begin working our way to removing the intake manifold. We'll start by removing everything attached to it. While you go through this process, make sure to take a lot of pictures. Although we have dozens of manuals to show us where everything went, it's still easier to visually see it in pictures on your own car. We begin by removing the sensors and vacuum lines, then the fuel lines connected to the throttle body, and then the throttle body itself. Next, we can remove the exhaust gas recirculation valve. It's attached with two small 13mm bolts. You'll need to use a box wrench to get this off. Before you begin removing any of the 7 intake bolts, be sure that you've properly drained the coolant from the radiator valve at the front. There is a cooling passage that butts up against the intake on the cylinder head and another into the side of the intake. This will leak coolant in the engine bay if not first properly drained. We can then begin removing the bolts holding the intake manifold to the cylinder head. One of them is where the ignition coil is bolted to, so we'll remove that one first. Let's not forget the crossover vacuum line that connects to the brake booster. In total, there are exactly 7 bolts that attach the intake manifold to the cylinder head. The 3 on the top are of course the easiest to get to, followed by the 2 that mount in the front of the EGR valve, and then the 2 on the bottom that are the most difficult. You'll have your most difficulty removing the one on the bottom closest to the passenger side. There is a large bracket in the way that must be removed first. Once the bracket is removed, you'll have a small narrow space with which to get a socket wrench in there to actually remove the intake bolt. The others are fairly easy, but the ones by the EGR will take the most time. I recommend using a box wrench to get at them more easily. Finally, we'll do the 2 top intake bolts last. Once these are removed, you can lift the intake up and out of the way. Success! This is all very exciting. Next, we'll want to dig a little deeper and find out if this is a roller cam engine. Back to you, Doris.
It's easy to see what you mean. Now for the details behind all this excitement, let's go to Video Beat's Craig Conley.
Thanks, Doris. Innovative, unique, one of a kind. That's Pontiac Fiero. Point out Fiero's new rear deck lid with a power bulge for engine clearance. Underneath, there's a big story to tell. The standard 2.5-liter L4 with electronic fuel injection and swirl port combustion is improved. It features roller cam lifters to reduce friction for enhanced economy and performance.
Roller lifters were a revision that was made halfway through the 1985 model year. There are many 1985 Fieros that rolled off the assembly line with the flat tappet lifters. I really do hope that I have roller lifters, because this provides improved smoothness to the engine's idle, but more importantly, roller cams take very little wear, if any. It also means that when we rebuild the engine, we won't have to worry as much about a proper break-in procedure. So, does my engine have roller lifters? Let's check! Fantastic! I do have roller lifters. Hello, roller lifters!
In this video, we removed the intake manifold and we discovered that my engine has roller lifters, which is really good. In the next video, we're going to be removing the exhaust manifolds. If you want to see that when it comes out, make sure to like and subscribe so you can get notified whenever I post another video. But before we go, do you think you can tell me what this is in the comments below? Thank you for watching.